But speaking of pardons, there's, should Trump pardon all January 6th defendants?
There's no question. Well, in my view, there's no question. I've been on something of a, campaign to promote it because it's at this point I'm very sympathetic to even the violent ones, and I'll put that in quotes. The footage is coming out now, and I mean it's additional footage has come out showing the cops opening fire on a crowd to agitate them specifically, and throwing tear gas in for no good, like as if they don't have the right to what was up until the moment of peacefully protest. The question's going to be, well, who's going to be the first one to get pardoned? Enrique Tarrio? I mean, there's odds on this, but do you think Enrique gets pardoned?
Well, I think what threw everything for a wrench today was whatever JD said. I saw JD's follow-up comment, but I didn't see JD's initial comments.
Was it on Twitter? Let me go see if I can pull this up.
I know his response was on Twitter, that somebody perceived what he said as what he came back as, he said Trump's going to do an individualized assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my own view, I get what JD is saying. My own view is any individualized assessment would come back to the same conclusion. Every single case, did the prosecutor follow the rules? No. Every single case. You can cite examples of that. Were they prosecuted in D.C.? The answer is yes in every single case. That means the grand jury was contaminated, the judicial bench was contaminated, and the trial jury were contaminated. To me, that alone, adding in the hidden discovery that's applicable to everybody could have benefited from these disclosures that are only now coming out and others that are still hidden, means the process was so tainted that, to JD's point, that anytime the process was completely contaminated, we got to throw those cases out. That applies to all of them. I think trying to go now, if you want to go through and prove that with each one, you can. But again, to me, look at what all of them have in common. All of them went before D.C. grand jury. All of them went before D.C. trial jury. All of them went before D.C. judge. That was the problem from day one. The grand juries could not be impartial. The trial juries could not be impartial. The judges could not be impartial. Plenty of evidence and data for that. They can get, expert opinions from Richard Barris, People's Pundit Daily, the big data poll, because he surveyed D.C. versus other jurisdictions, and it was clear that D.C. was the most prejudiced jurisdiction in the country and the most prejudiced jurisdiction he'd ever surveyed. And he's been doing trial research for me and other people for better part of a decade that he'd ever seen. And so to me, that's why I've been encouraging them to have that focal point. Focus on the process. Don't get waddled down. It was the same argument I made early on in the Alex Jones cases. Like, don't get stuck arguing the details of who said what when, but look at the process. Is the process a process we can have confidence in producing a competent constitutional comporting outcome? And the answer has to be no for every single January 6th defendant. So just pardon them all.
Because what would the mechanism even look like? They're going to go one by one. There's how many? There's 1,000 of them.
There's 1,000 plus. There's 1,000 plus.
And I don't know how it even works in general. Someone comes to the president and says, "Here, you should consider this pardon." Does he have people?
It goes to a pardon committee. There's usually either somebody in the Justice Department and somebody at the White House who is assigned handling pardons, and they go pardon requests, commutation requests, etc. Some of what's being considered are labeled pardons under like Cauchy's betting rules. Cauchy considers a commutation also to be a pardon. I was curious about that because technically, like Roger Stone, for example, didn't get a pardon. He got a commutation, so he didn't have to serve any time, is my recollection. I think the felony status, hung with hand. It sticks with him, if I recall right. So it varies case by case. But I get the idea of trying to do an individualized system. The problem here is what was so systemically bad was universal to all of them. And that's why, originally I started off the same position JD had. So let's separate out the violent from the nonviolent. The violent can, go through the legal process, see what happens. The nonviolent should all be set free immediately. But now, when I've seen how bad contaminated the entire process is, I can't have confidence in any verdict in a January.
You can have confidence that every verdict and process was tainted. Period. Full stop. Yeah. It's only a matter of degree. Someone in our locals community posted us the link here. I think it's this. Let's hear this here. This should be, it's 30 seconds.
As President Trump says there's a process, where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
All right. Well, I still like him. I still trust him. I think that might be a confusing. That's the politically correct caveat.
Well, it's the same position I had 3 years ago, but it's not the one I have now. And the reason for my change, and I think he partially reflected that because he put up later, he clarified that if the process was constitutionally contaminated, then that too would be grounds that what he meant to say was, all nonviolent people are getting pardons no matter what. Everybody else may be getting a pardon if their case was contaminated. That's how I take his combined statements to mean. And I think that's the proper approach. The reason why I wouldn't, well, what they know is anybody that's violent that gets pardoned or has been accused of a violent crime, that will be the media's highlight, right? They won't talk about, they would like, at least initially out of the gate, for every single case that gets highlighted to not be a violent case and get to the violent cases a month or 2 months from now, for example, after a full review is done of their case. I get that. And that's a smart political process to take. The reason why I have a different approach is I think I want the world to focus on the process. The process is bad. Now, the best way to do that is to add other cases that are not January 6 cases into that fold. Add and look for big names. Julian Assange, Ed Snowden, Roger Ver, Bitcoin Jesus. These are the cases. Ross Ulbricht, who he's already promised he's going to commute the sentence ASAP, day one. Do those cases as well. And then you don't have to worry so much about the way the media is going to try to portray it, because there's going to be all these big cases that everybody can't help but talk about. You know, the Bitcoin Jesus, Ross Ulbricht is, Silk Road, so-called Dread Private Roberts. These are, prominent cases that impact key communities and constituencies that were clearly victimized by an out-of-control Biden Justice Department. But it goes back to why we have a system that says better a 10 guilty people go free than one innocent man go to prison. What is that American system rooted in? It's rooted in the greatest danger to our freedoms and liberties doesn't come from our fellow man, it comes from our government. And so we always have to side with doing whatever it takes to prohibit and punish the government from engaging in bad behavior, because that is a greater risk to us than a single criminal going free. And that should be the point of the January 6 cases, that it doesn't matter what they're accused of, the process was the punishment, and the process was unconstitutional in how it was handled them. The grand jury was not impartial. The trial jury was not impartial. The bench, the judges were not impartial. They were prejudicial.
And the punishment was disproportionate given what has been issued to other people guilty of police brutality. Some of whom get bail, get bond released pending their trials.
Their rights were denied. Their associational rights were denied. Their press rights were denied. Their right to petition government for the redress of grievances was denied. In some cases, their Second Amendment rights were denied. Their Fourth Amendment rights were denied. Their Fifth Amendment rights were denied. Their Sixth Amendment rights were denied. Their Eighth Amendment rights were denied. And I can go point by point by point, item by item by item, and case by case by case. So there's simply no doubting that. So if the administration will feel more comfortable if that's written up in a big form, there's a bunch of us that can do that can form the documentary proven portion. But every single January 6th defendant was maltreated. There was not a single January 6th defendant they tried in their home jurisdiction, for example. Not one.
I'm just looking at, so I just put out a tweet that said part of them all, yada, yada. And then someone says, even the feds, did you see JD's update? If what JD meant,
some of them are feds, that's fine too.
Well,
you don't know who is and who isn't. And I get that part of it. You could pardon them. The former feds, you don't need to pardon because they were never indicted.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point.
So then, then that's just pardoning everybody who was there on January 6th. That's but that's a different kind. That would be the Jimmy Carter pardoned everybody who fled to Canada thing.
I don't think that ambiguity is there. It's true. You pardon everyone who was indicted, and the only one that might include, you'd want to exclude, is Ray Epps. Okay, so everybody except Ray Epps. Ray Epps, no pardon for you. Scaffolding guy wasn't indicted. Pipe bomber guy wasn't indicted. So you pardon everybody who was indicted on January 6th, period, except Ray Epps. He does not deserve a pardon. he actually deserves further prosecution. But whatever. Hypothetically, Epps doesn't get a pardon. Can he ever be further prosecuted, or he's got?
Yeah, there's still things he could be pardoned. I mean, to the degree that these people were complicit in an effort to set people up and did things like commit perjury along the way, there's a bunch of things they could be criminally prosecuted for. I mean, there was clearly a systematic and systemic effort to violate people's federal civil rights. So I get what JD is saying. I think the reason why people were sensitive to it, they're like that old distinction doesn't make sense anymore because of how contaminated the process was, which JD did appear to acknowledge.
No, well, first of all, if he walked it back, that's already a good sign. I won't call him flip-flopping. I appreciate, like, it was the only politically palatable proposal at the time. Like, okay, you can't justify violence at a protest. We now know what they did as a result of whatever violence did occur.
And some of this is being spread by bad faith actors like Laura Loomer and others. That there's effort afoot to suggest that anybody that's tech tied in the new Trump administration is secretly sabotaging Trump, and they're trying to create conflict. So they're trying to create, Laura Loomer's out there trying to create conflict between Trump and Vivek, between Trump and Musk, between Trump and Vance. You know, just stick to her little space of the world. I mean, she'll be forgotten in 10 years. And ignore those kind of people that are trying to make something bigger than it is. JD it was one of the first people to speak out for the January 6th defendants when nobody. It's not like he's not sensitive to the subject.
No, for sure. But it's also not like, if he sincerely holds that belief, it's not like it's an untenable or radically indefensible position. Like,
no, it was Trump's original position himself.
Yeah. Let me
Trump
bring
just
this up.
went on to expand it, realizing that all the cases are contaminated.
Well, I think once you saw 5 illegal immigrants beating the ever-loving piss out of a New York police officer getting released the same day, and I don't think they had any bail or cash bail, then you can sort of understand 4 years for whatever Jake Lang did is not justice whatsoever. It's an absolute injustice. 22 years for Enrique Tarrio for doing no violence. And do they consider seditious conspiracy off-site to be violence?